Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.
Welcome to Great Taste on KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa. I'm Steve Boss. 60 minutes of delicious radio coming your way on KRUU. Also, if you happen to be here at our live event, you're listening to this, it's not live any longer, but we are at Green Building Supply, and we're going to be talking about pickles and also live fermentation. We have with us Dan Gorman and John Buzan, both of Bubbling Brine Brothers. I love that name, by the way, and I dare anybody to keep saying it 10 times. Fast. Bubbling Brine Brothers, Bubbling Brine. See, I can't even do it 2 times. Anyway, I'm very excited to talk with you guys about this whole process. I'm probably more excited to eat all this wonderful stuff afterwards. But let's get started right away. I will mention to all of our listeners that this is the second half hour of our show that we call Iowa Cooks. And these guys are our Iowa Cooks because they are actually doing this business here in Iowa. And where are you from originally?
DeLand, Florida. It's like Central Florida.
Is it cold enough for you in the winter here?
It's somewhat of a doozy, but I can handle it.
Excellent. And you?
I'm from Northeast Missouri.
Oh, well, you're all right.
Yeah.
Dan's fine. We can talk to him. He's good. So how in the world did you get started with this whole concept of doing live fermentation, not only eating this kind of product, but also wanting to make a business out of it?
Well, I mean, we got started definitely with the best probably fermented thing, which is beer. And from there, we realized that anything fermented.
Will you hold on one second?
Yeah.
I didn't hear 1 ounce of laughter from anybody here. That's a little better. I mean, that's unbelievable. That was a great answer. Okay.
Well, I'm being honest. I mean, but so many of the best foods are fermented at some point or the other, like cheese and bread and all these things. So when we got into this, we didn't even know what we were doing, and it was delicious. And then we're like, okay, if we refine it and learn a little bit about it, then we can obviously improve on it. So.
Okay. And how did you guys get together?
We actually met our first semester in college about 4 years ago, and then we ended up being roommates, having a house, and so that made it easy to like experiment together, like as far as like beer and kombucha. Then we start chopping all the veggies and stuff. And
nice. And both of you were in a sustainable living program in college, right?
Yeah, I was in the. That's part of why I'm so interested in this, because I was in the soil biology track where we learn about how the soil works, which is basically live organisms as well. So the root system is a lot like our digestive tract. So putting those together opens up a whole new world of understanding for how important microorganisms are to us.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I had Elaine Ingham on the show. I think it was last week. It was recently anyway. And for those of you who don't know who she is an amazing person who is spending her life dedicated to explaining to everyone why it's so important that we take care of the soil, and how even with all the problems that exist in the soil today around the world, it's still such an amazing piece of craftsmanship of nature that it can regenerate itself. It just needs a little bit of help, no matter how bad it is. And I love that whole idea.
Yeah, it's the same philosophy with your stomach as well. I mean, a lot of people get certain diseases where their gut is sick, especially in America and westernized, industrialized nations. So adding the right microbiology, which is her philosophy as well, adding compost and compost tea back to it kind of sets the cycle back in place. Nature is perfect, and we just have to work with it rather than against it with, all the fertilizers and pesticides and pasteurized foods.
I like what you said. Nature's perfect. We just have to work with it. That's another topic, and I think a lot of people would find reason to argue with you, but I happen to be in your camp, and I think that it's real interesting that people have such strong feelings that as human beings that they need to control as opposed to work with. And my major point of contention is that there's just too much testosterone in the world, and if you got rid of that, then things would be a lot better. How do you feel about that?
there's definitely an imbalance in the representation of and you see a lot of that played out in like our whole war on bacteria, like not just like with antibiotics and everything, but like we just don't have a lot of understanding of these different levels of the microbiology playing out and how we're supported in it. Because our digestive tract is a lot like an inverted root system. We're like these plants walking around, and we're moving the earth through that root system rather than being planted in one place. And like that's a metaphor I really like, that helps me like think of that reciprocation of nutrients in and out of the flesh of the earth and the flesh of our bodies.
And also, it's another point of view, but somewhat the same. Bill Bryson, I remember, wrote in A Short History of Nearly Everything that we are actually hosts here. If we think that we're in control, we're totally off. We're hosts, and all of these microorganisms are really the ones that are in control of everything.
Yeah, if you look at it, like our whole evolution is just like these organisms higher up on the trophic levels, like including ourselves and everything from carnivores to plants. They're just like the propagation. They're like these mechanisms for all the lower order, or that's not a good way to put it, but like all the fungi, bacteria, and everything. We're just like these vehicles for them to elaborate their expression and their organization to diversify and carry out like their own expression.
Dan, I'm wondering, did you get into this whole thing because of reasons of health, or were there a myriad of reasons that you did, or just because you liked beer a lot and wanted to continue working with product like that?
Beer was definitely a part of it, but I was taking a season extension class where I got a hold of Sandra Katz's book Wild Fermentation, and I was like, fermented food, I'm completely ignorant of this subject. And then my friend who had went to Costa Rica was going on and on about sauerkraut, and I finally made some, and I opened it and it just like exploded everywhere. And I was like, okay, there's something to this. And it was really good, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I was like, okay, let's keep going with this.
Okay, well, let's discuss this a little bit, because people are familiar with fermented foods to a degree. Everybody's eaten pickles, for example. Many people have eaten sauerkraut. Kimchi is another. So what are the differences? Is the process the same for all these, or how does it work?
Let's talk about pickles. Okay, when you say pickle, you mean something that's preserved in an organic acid of sorts. So most pickles in the United States are vinegar, which is essentially acidic acid. But what we do is we take, like, every raw vegetable has tons of bacteria on it. In our case, lactobacillus and different species of that. And what we do is put salt in it so that none of the other bad bacteria can proliferate, and then lactobacillus takes over, and then there's like 3 or 4 stages of acidity where they each grow, and they're just digesting carbohydrates and making acid. So then it's lactic acid, what's in your muscles and a lot of bodily functions. But then, yeah, it just preserves it for years. So
when this happens, is it the same kind of process that, for example, yogurt is made that way? I mean, is it the same kind of bacteria?
Yeah. There's a lot of different strains of lactobacillus, but basically these bacteria are producing lactic acid, which is, they're in an anaerobic environment, and when oxygen's not in that environment, they're basically outcompeting any of the bad things that you wouldn't want. Well, we use the word bad, but really, like, we can't label any bacteria as bad or good. It's just a matter of like the roles they're playing, like based on the balance of the whole community going on there.
Well, the thing is that when most of us think about lactic acid, though, we think about it, at least I do, as something that is quote-unquote bad, because we don't want it to build up in our muscles because it makes us tired, it hurts, that type of thing. So what's the difference here?
Well, it's really balanced. Like if your stomach is too acidic, obviously that can lead to a lot of things. You hear a lot of people talking about alkalinity being important in your foods, and then not enough acidity is just as bad too. There's a threshold there, and as far as like in the muscles and stuff, Dan, do you remember? I think it was in Missing Microbes. He was talking about the way lactic acid in the muscles when it builds up plays into. I can't remember exactly how, but the bacteria are like.
Well, I mean, we're talking about your muscles rather than your stomach. Your stomach needs to be. Pathogens can't survive in an acidic environment. So essentially this is like a stomach. Like, it's pretty close to the pH of your stomach, and it's already what your stomach's going to do to it. Your colon is so colonized with microbes to break carbohydrate cellulose chains that we can't normally break. And some people, when they lose those, they can't. I mean, they're the microorganisms that decide what nutrition you get. So like morbidly obese people have a very different microbiome, as they say, than a lean person. And so, I mean, they've done tons of studies where they take gut bacteria from a lean thing and put it in an obese mice, and then they become obese or lean. And they've done it over and over again. So
these foods themselves, though, preserved foods, have been a part of civilization for thousands and thousands of years.
Longer than we know. Yeah. Definitely beer was probably the first. And that's what a lot of civilizations were built on. You know, the Egyptians were on it, Sumerians, everyone. But I mean, when they figured this out, especially
microbreweries or,
No.
large, like Anheuser-Busch or what?
The Egyptians were bigger than Anheuser-Busch by far. But as far as vegetables goes, I think Japan was probably the first country to really have it down. But they do a lot more mold cultures, which is a fungus rather than a bacteria.
Yeah, it definitely predates agriculture. Obviously, like as a species, our first interactions with it were spontaneous ferments. But then part of agriculture and that domestication of crops and stuff was simultaneous with the domestication of these spontaneous ferments, trying to control and create specific climates for that digestion to happen. It's a way of like extending our digestive system outside of ourselves. Like you're like the bacteria are starting to break it down before you even get it, and then once they get in there, then they're when they break down all the polysaccharides and all the complex carbohydrates, the metabolic byproduct of that is like short chain fatty acids, and they also assimilate nutrients and create vitamins that like you otherwise could not. Like, so you hear things like insoluble fiber, like just its only function is like the movement of waste through the body. That is one aspect of it, but also the bacteria in your stomach that aren't necessarily your human cells. They're these host organisms. When they eat that, their metabolic byproduct is nurturing the lining of your stomach. And you'll hear a lot of things today about like leaky gut syndrome, and the systemic effects of that are like inflammation, which can be, related to most chronic diseases today. The only way to nourish the lining of the gut is through these short chain fatty acids, rather than most tissue in the body is nourished through the blood. But this is actually like one of the more interesting parts of how we've co-evolved with these organisms. Like we cannot survive without them.
Would everybody some of you maybe move down a little bit so that these gentlemen can have a seat to sit in, so they don't have to stand? That would be awesome. Take some chairs over on the other end over there. Oh, okay. That's good too. Just get down below the camera and find yourself a chair. That's perfect. Okay, so let's go into that a little bit more, because the surface response, I think, is, well, wait a minute. Okay, so these are great foods, everybody says, and people are looking at them today as some type of cure-alls for many of the ills that, as you mentioned, leaky gut syndrome and imbalances in the system. But wasn't lifespan a lot shorter back when these things first evolved?
Yeah, but that was also before we knew anything about sickness, like the four humors and all of that back in the day. I mean, now we know a lot more about microbiology. Microbiology is a very, very new science. And we've only been able to distinguish, okay, we can see all this bacteria, but we've only been able to tell that they're different in the past like 20 years. And like, to be very specific, in our gut, we can only culture, I think, like not even 30%. And that's on the outside, so it doesn't even matter. It has to be in the context of our gut. But I mean, there's all this science coming out in the past 3 years that's relating so many health things back to our gut, and what's called the enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system that lines your gut and produces all of your serotonin and most of your dopamine, which controls, your emotions and all of that. So then there's the brain-gut connection. They call it the second brain. You feel it in your gut. There's a lot of things with the gut, yeah. And it's all coming out. And like a lot of things, we like to think that we know everything, but we don't know that much about the human body. And how.
Real quick, another thing about life expectancy that we don't really take into account when we look at like pre-agriculture societies, or even like pre-refrigeration societies and stuff, is that it's always an average. So the infant mortality rate being higher, you still have people living to be 90 and 100, but you hear the average life expectancy of a certain period being only like 30 years old or something like that. It's just because like if, you know, the infant mortality rate's higher, so if you make it past 5 years old, chances are you're gonna like live well into your elder years.
You're listening to Great Taste on KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa. I'm Steve Boss. 60 minutes of delicious radio on KRUU, and I am really excited because this conversation is going to lead to some fantastic tastes as time goes on. But I'm visiting right now with Dan Gorman and John Buzan from Bubbling Brine Brothers. Right? Good. All right. So let's talk about the fermentation process then a little bit. First of all, I want to look at your shirt. Homegrown, stewardship, health, and community, food products. How does all that go together, and why are you wearing that?
I'm wearing this because this was the company that initially got me into the idea of starting a business out of it. It was an internship I did in Portland, Oregon. And these guys, it was two people, and one of them was an organic farmer too. So they were like all about growing their own food, stewarding the land. You know, it's our generation's goal to, I mean, we're obligated to fix what prior generations have done to the soil and the whole food system. So it's like, that's part of our, you know, agenda too, is to take that into our hands and be responsible for it. So I guess that's that's my answer.
So they inspired you to actually do this?
Yeah. A lot of things, but mostly these guys, because they're young kids just like us too, and just trying to, you know, change the food system because it's not right.
And what about yourself?
As far as his shirt?
No, forget about his shirt. That's his shirt. You know, your shirt, I don't know if we can comment. I mean, it's nice shirt.
Thank you. Thank you.
But as far as the inspiration, when you guys got together, do you have different roles? Do you have different roles in the company essentially, or are you both doing the same type of thing?
We do a lot of the same thing. If anything, I'd say Dan probably gets more into the experimentation aspect of it. But what draws me into it is just kind of like this meta idea of healing the human venture in relation to the Earth and how the biosphere's metabolism is working. Like, we're inside of the Earth's metabolism right now, and the human component of that is currently dysfunctional. And so by healing the digestion of the soil and the digestion in our guts, it's we're addressing so many different aspects of like more or less what our education's revolved around, sustainability.
So when it comes to creating products, what is it that you want to try to do when it comes to your business model?
Well, a lot of it is appealing to a wide array of tastes. You know, we have several things we've been experimenting with, and obviously, you know, like throughout the season and throughout the year, there's a lot of like small things we do that are like pretty funky or out there, but I guess like balancing flavors with mindfulness of like the healing aspects of the different herbs involved, the different plants. Like for example, this, if it's not too soon to get into this, the yellowish one you see right there, we call it the Vedic kraut. It's turmeric, fenugreek. It's pretty nurturing. It's definitely constructed to
heal the whole system.
Exactly.
Nice. All right, we were going to get into this, and somehow I got sidetracked. So what about the different processes? Because people are familiar with kimchi, people are familiar with sauerkraut. I think less people are familiar with this type of lacto-fermentation.
Well, the only difference between kimchi and sauerkraut is usually what you put in it. And kimchi you usually soak into brine so that it ferments faster. But we usually don't do that. We just mix the salt and let the water come out of it, and then use that as the water, you know, for the whole thing, and then just keep it under with weights, because there's obviously tons of microorganisms in the air that can spoil it. But once you have it covered and away from oxygen, it's fine, because it becomes so acidic that nothing can survive in it besides the good microorganisms.
And I think also sauerkraut, I think if you talk to a lot of people, they think about sauerkraut and they go, oh, I can't stand that stuff. You know, it's like, that's that stuff in the can that my mother used to open or whatever, you know.
It's sauerkraut has the deep-seated derogatory, like, power behind it, because, yeah, it's like, oh, my grandma made me eat that or whatever. And I've had some really bad stuff out of a bag and all of this, but it's because in the industrialized food model, they don't have time to deal with live cultures. And back before, like the germ theory, like with Louis Pasteur, back then they knew that germs cause sickness, but they didn't realize that it's all like a symbiotic ecology, and we're just attacking the bad ones when there's a lot more good ones to keep it in check. Otherwise, we would not be alive right now because we're all completely covered in microorganisms from head to toe.
So where did sauerkraut, people, that particular form of this kind of pickle originate from?
Oh, that's the German one. Kimchi is Korea. Every country has some sort of fermented thing. Like in Russia, they have a drink called kvass. And there's so many. And in Japan, they have koji and miso and tempeh. And there's just literally every culture besides America has numerous fermented things in there. In Germany, the national dish is called Sauerbraten, which is like a beef shoulder fermented for a few days. I actually made that, but I wanted to get the full effect, so I fermented it for like 2 weeks. And it turned green. But it was really good.
So you do the experimentation, just like John said. That's great. So let me ask. I hear some groans actually from the audience, but let me ask you: is this something that anybody can do, or do we have to buy these products, or is it something that anyone can learn how to do at home?
I mean, you can learn how to do it at home, but you kind of have to have an eye for ingredients and proportions. I've showed quite a few people how to make it, and then when I tried it, it was either too salty or too spicy or whatever. I mean, it's just the same thing as cooking. It's like, do you measure your ingredients or do you just eye it out like a chef does? Mm-hmm. It's the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So is this something that when you actually get into it, it becomes second nature to make these things? Because a lot of chefs, as you said, a lot of chefs measure. Though Joanne Chang, who is the chef owner of Flour Bakery in Boston and also several other restaurants, one of her tips that she gave our listeners that she said was absolutely critical, but this is baking, so it's totally different, is always use a scale. Right, but this is the kind of thing that you can begin to get familiar enough with that you can eye.
Definitely, and especially because you're taking care of these live cultures and they're changing over time, it forces you to kind of your own living rhythms and patterns are adapting to these small ecosystems, and so in a lot of ways you're kind of like intuitively communicating with these bacteria. At least that's how I like to think of it.
Yeah, I like that. Anybody here, by the way, make live cultured product at home? Okay, I never said to turn off your cell phone, so I didn't. But everybody, please do, because we don't need to listen to chimes. Luckily, they're mine, so that way I can't say anything to anybody. And it was also Kathy Dubois who used to be the co-host of the show, so that was okay too. We'll forgive her. So you do? Anybody else? Several people. Okay, and we'll talk to you. If anybody wants to talk about what they do at home, I think it'd be really interesting to do that, and we can do that in the next few minutes or in the second half hour of the show. So what are we going to do in the second half hour? We're actually going to prepare some things, right? So we have here. I always hate this part because it's like unfair to tell the radio people that they're going to miss that whole thing, but they are. So we kind of want to give them a little bit of an insight into it. So we have here some cabbage, and we also have a lot of finished product, and it looks like we have an absolutely beautiful salsa. So any of these types of things, and eggs. So eggs can be pickled too, I guess.
Yeah, we use the leftover brine to pickle them, and it changes them into like this like cheesy, creamy. It tastes like a delicacy. It tastes like expensive to me, and I'm the only person I've seen do it because it's the leftovers. Usually it would go down the drain, but you might as well use it and make the eggs last.
Yeah, might as well use it and use every part of what you're doing. And a lot of people say, oh, do you compost? I say, yeah, I do compost. I give all my compost to my neighbor, but I don't have as much as maybe a lot of people because I use a lot of the vegetables. I'm using it for, whether it's for soup stock or whatever other reasons. And so this is another great sustainability type of conclusion, I guess.
It's like compost for your stomach in a way.
Yeah, so I want to ask you guys, you're both young. Did you have any serious health problems before you started doing this or not?
No.
No, I'd have no kinds of awesome testimonies that's going to like change your life.
Okay. So that's okay. Anybody who makes this stuff, really, you want to come up here for 1 second? That'll be cool. But you have to wait till the microphone gets by you. Okay. Okay. Tell us.
So I make just kefir, milk kefir, and I've been doing it for years and years. And when I just started because I thought it was a good idea. But I had irritable bowel syndrome, and it's more or less cleared it up. So I can drink beer and wine,
You always keep coming back to that.
which I couldn't drink at all before. I mean, I'm
Do
still...
you drink a lot of that, beer and wine?
Yeah, right. His. No, I don't. And I have to still be careful, but I can indulge to some extent, which there was no way before I could do that.
Yeah, I think it is fascinating because everybody's different. So people are going to react. Thank you very much, by the way. People are going to react differently to different types of foods, and there's not one cure-all for. It's like if you eat these fermented foods, you're going to cure your leaky gut, or you're going to cure your irritable bowel system, or anything like that. But there are so many different approaches that people can take, and I love talking to everybody who is involved in these different types of things, because if you take the best information from all these people who, like yourselves, are committed to improving the health of the world through delicious things, you're going to find that you're going to be able to create much easier a balance within yourself. And I think that's the key, is just getting the information out to people so that they can actually take it into their own hands and make a difference with their lives. And most people don't have any idea that this stuff exists. So let's talk about, maybe, is there another product that also has some really cool health benefits that you're doing?
For now, we're mostly focusing on the fermented vegetables. But to go back real
I meant in terms of the fermented vegetables, you mentioned the one kind.
Oh, yeah.
What is that, the Vedic kraut, you said?
Yeah. In the middle there, the kind of palish looking one is the curtido, which is kind of like a...
Curtido?
I'm saying it completely wrong. It's inspired from an El Salvadorian thing, so I guess you'd say it more like curtido or something. But it's got a lot of oregano in it, which is definitely one of the best parts of it. But that one also has a lot of red chili pepper. And to go back really quick to what you were saying, like it's so easy for people to get caught up in like fad diets and things, and the idea that there's one end-all solution to dietary problems. If anything, the diversification of the diet is the biggest thing. Diversification of your fiber intake, especially. And through this, you're getting mad fiber, and it's also pre-digested with these beneficial organisms. And yeah, so to detract from that, that one has the oregano, and then the one right here on the left is a type of relish. It's got turnip, carrots, garlic. It's pretty tasty.
You're listening to Great Taste on KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa. I want to thank Dan Gorman and John Buzan for being with us in this last half hour of the show that we call Iowa Cooks. And you have the opportunity to tune in every week for 60 minutes of delicious radio on KRUU. I'm Steve Boss, your host, and we hope you'll join us next week. All right. Now we're continuing, okay, because that was the radio show. And we're finished with that. So now what I'd like to do is call on Joel, because he has a question. We can't hear you, though, so either you're going to have to, come up here. So Joel, I don't think anybody could hear you, so I just want to repeat it as best I can, and that is that we're dealing with bacteria here. That's what we're discussing in terms of these products. And most people, when they hear the word bacteria, it frightens them. That's probably the first reaction that most people have. Right, right, exactly. And so the question is, are there good bacteria, bad bacteria? How do we know that the bacteria that are involved in the process that's involved here are good for us or not good for us? How do you sort that whole question out?
Okay, so since we co-evolved with plants in the soil, most of these organisms are already in us, already commensal within our system. So we're just adding to the population that kind of keeps things in balance, that we know is good. Like, for instance, in yogurt, it's Lactobacillus acidophilus, which is what a lot of probiotics are. But I don't really trust the pills because they're made in a factory, and if you can get something from food, then why not?
Yeah, so like there's right now in your gut, there's like precursors to E. coli and all the things that we would call bad. And sight and smell are a good indication. Obviously, if you're experimenting with ferments at home and something turns a really weird rainbow color, you may want to scrape that off the top and or mix it in. I don't know, who knows. But yeah, definitely rely on sight and smell. And you know, certain ferments will have a really bizarre smell, but they're totally fine. And so you hear things about like people going to different countries and then getting food poisoning, while the people there can eat tons of things that are just fine. So over time, you kind of like build up a reservoir of genetic diversity of the bacteria in your gut, which is training your immune system to handle a wide array of things. Not saying that you start eating funkier, greener, weirder, smellier things by any means, but yeah, it's definitely like one of the more safer things, like compared to canning, where you're killing off all the bacteria. The chances of the certain bad guys establishing in the population is more so. Like you hear the horror stories of an entire family dying from botulism or something like that. With lactic acid fermentation, lactofermentation, it's a different kind of concern than other modes of preservation.
So would people in the food world, especially those in we'll say the raw food end of things, they would look at all this as raw food?
Yeah. It's as raw as you can get. There's more probiotics in one jar of that than 5 bottles of probiotics.
Wow.
Yeah. We're talking 10 trillion per 4 ounces.
10 trillion strains of lactobacillus, is that what it is?
No, not strains per se, but just amount. Like there's probably 6 or 7 different strains, but just like sheer population.
Wow. Okay, well, let's move these chairs out of the way and let's get going. Let's do some stuff here, and I will follow you guys around, and you'll just kind of tell us a little bit about what you're going to do and how the process is going to work.
I guess first of all we could just get some samples to try by itself for everyone.
After we're finished, yes.
Or what are we gonna cut up stuff first?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to work. You've got to work, and they have to work by listening in order to.
Okay, we eat at the end. Okay, we got lots of stuff to try though.
That'll be. Believe me, you don't have to worry about it. It'll all be cleaned out, I'm sure.
Okay, let me put this over here. Okay, so we're just gonna chop up some cabbage then.
Okay, so can you use just any vegetables at all?
Yeah.
Honestly, the skies are the limit. The main substrate that we're using is cabbage, and
why?
That's a really good question. Because honestly, how many people do you know are fanatic about cabbage?
Not too many people.
Right. So
I love cabbage, but
it's putting it to good use in a lot of different ways. But there really are no limits. Like kvass, the Russian ferment is mostly beets and any kind of radish. Root vegetables work really well, but honestly, kind of like you're looking at like it's going to be different based on the carbohydrates and sugars going on, and it's open up to experimentation. Like it's not some like set science where we're all evolving this thing together and creating it as we go.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun. But can you do the same thing though with this as you do with canning? In other words, string beans. You can have such production of tremendous amounts of vegetables in the summertime. So string beans and carrots and corn, everything that you think of that people can. Tomatoes.
Oh yeah, I've done corn and it was so delicious because it's like there's more bioavailable sugars already in corn, so it was like super vigorous. It exploded on me. And I've also did carrots. I mean, you can take, and what I did with this was I just took sauerkraut juice and poured it in here because there's already trillions of bacteria in there just ready to start devouring it. And if I would have did it a little earlier, this would just be bubbling.
So this is the live salsa. Right?
It's barely alive right now. It's in its infancy. But
so what's going to be the difference? So this is at the beginning. You took the leftover, essentially liquid from the sauerkraut, and poured it into cut up vegetables. You've got tomatoes and green pepper and jalapenos and onion. Okay, so just like you'd make a typical pico de gallo, for example. Mm-hmm. And instead of lime juice, there's live culture in here.
You could do lime juice too.
Because do lime juice too.
Yeah, you could do both, or you could just throw some pieces of sauerkraut in there, and it will eventually, even if you don't put anything in there, there's already tons of bacteria in there, and you just give them the chance to proliferate, it's going to ferment. Anything's going to like, we're so not used to it in America because everything is pasteurized, heated up to the point to where everything's dead. But anything, any vegetable is going to ferment if you give it the time. And drinks too, like even like lemonade you get from the store, like it will ferment. Especially if you leave it out, there's tons of yeast in there. Like everything is fermentable.
All right, so what are the differences? That's what I'm interested in right now. The difference that we're going to notice. So at the beginning of the infancy, it's just going to be this fresh taste of all these wonderful vegetables together with a little acidity that's there, right? And there's salt in there also then, right? Okay. And then what's going to happen over time, and how much time are we talking about? Sorry, one last thing. And is this what we would do? Or do we have to use some special equipment, or can we just close it up with a lid?
Well, something like salsa, you want to eat within a few days because the consistency changes because it's being, metabolized. But it unlocks a lot of different flavors that you wouldn't normally taste. That's why sauerkraut, because all of these different like phenols and smells and all these things are being unlocked that you normally wouldn't have with just cabbage, salt, and water. So it's basically them unlocking it. Same thing with like cheeses, like blue vein cheeses are a certain bacteria that they introduce to it, and then they devour all those different sugars and make all these crazy, beautiful flavors with wine as well.
Okay, so this isn't the kind of thing that we're going to leave for a long time, though. But these beauties, can they just last forever once you put them in a jar?
They can last multiple years, especially at low temperatures. In Korea with kimchi, like the really high-end, fancy, expensive kimchi is like 2 or 3 years old, just like cheese. Just like cheese, right.
Yes. I think, if you have a question, come up here because unfortunately nobody can hear you. You can come right through. Nobody can hear you, and we want to make sure that everybody can hear you. Nobody's going to see your feet. Come closer.
Steve asked me to bring this. And hi, I'm Val. This is beets that were obviously fermented, canned. And look at the date on that. It's from the year 2013. This was a gift. I am frightened to death to open it and eat it because it's 2 years old. What would you suggest I do?
Now, before you answer that question, I want to say that this is a real problem in the American kitchen. Every product that you buy in the grocery store has a best if used by date on it. Most of those are really a part of, just conforming to particular laws. They don't even have anything to do with whether the product is good or not after that date. I mean, obviously, if you open up a pack of crackers and you leave it open, it's going to become stale. But the point is that we are probably, I would assume, we're probably the most wasteful society in the entire world as far as food is concerned. And part of that waste, a large part of it, is everybody looking at these dates on their products, and fear is stricken into their hearts, and they just toss the stuff. Now, it may be for good reason, but I think it's important to state that most of the stuff that people are throwing away is fine. Now, to your question.
I don't know if this is actually, if it was heated up by...
I think this is a canned product, isn't it?
It looks like it. I mean, I'll try it.
By the way, Green Building Supply is one of our sponsors here, and we want to just say, you guys, you're not liable. I'm going to go on record, saying that. If Dan tries this, but 911, we'll just get everybody,
It's going to be all over.
Well, isn't one of the things is that if it has been created under pressure and the lid pops, then at least you know that it hasn't been compromised that way.
Not necessarily. Things with botulism can be completely...
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you that if you try it, that's one more bite than Val's going to take out of it.
But I must try to tell you something also, that as the recipient of this Christmas gift, I tried to open it.
From a friend or somebody who didn't like it?
I don't know anymore in Fairfield. But I tried to open it manually, wouldn't work. Then I thought, okay, I can open it, which normally one would try. So please take a look at where my little chipmunk areas are, because I couldn't open the damn thing. And
Okay, who else makes fermented product at home? I wanted to just come on up. I just want to and Joy also. He's going to try it, and then we'll watch him and see how he does. I hope he's going to last long enough to finish the demo. That we don't have to call 911 before that. Okay, what do you make?
I make cucumber pickles, and they're brine pickles, no vinegar, and so they're not. It's not a boil. It's not a.
It's a live fermentation process, then, right?
As I understand, I have to keep them refrigerated.
So now is that different? Because that's like quick pickling. Most people call that when you just are doing kind of something that you have to keep refrigerated. That's not the same type of thing as this type of process, right?
Well, it's basically exactly the same thing. The all refrigeration is just slowing down the natural breakdown process that bacteria are always doing. Like, everything's covered in bacteria, all our food are. And so it's constantly being broken down. Refrigeration just slows that down. Same with ferments. You can make them last a lot longer if you refrigerate them. Obviously, just over time they're gonna be different. The texture is gonna change and things like that. They're gonna get to different levels of their metabolic stages, and you might have different dominant bacteria in there. But it'll still be fine to eat for the most part.
How are you feeling?
I feel fine. It's good. It's fine. It was just like canning is okay, but it lasts super long if it's canned, but that's because it kills, you boil it, so it kills every microorganism that's in it. But what we do is we let the microorganism preserve it itself.
You let the microorganisms essentially are thriving in your process.
Yeah. There's so many of them. I've looked at it through a microscope before, and it just looks like a wall. Yeah.
That sounds very cool, actually. You take your discussion over to the side, and you'll be all right. But I think we're going to proceed with our microorganisms that are alive as opposed to yours that are dead. But if you leave that open, you can probably get a lot of microorganisms to come in there and enjoy themselves, and maybe they'll be okay. Joy?
I do cultured mustard.
I know you do. It's really good.
And I do pickled eggs and all of these different things. It's fun to try things out and new and different things. And you can take something that you've purchased, like hers, that's been canned, and put it in live fermentation leftover juice, and it will begin to work and become alive again.
You see, I was just joking, but that really is true, huh? Yeah. So Val, you're good. You don't have to throw that away. You can start putting in it. Go buy a jar of Bubby's sauerkraut and take the juice and throw that stuff in it, and you'll have something really cool. Bubby's, I don't, these guys, they haven't. You could, all right, buy a jar of bubbling Brine Brothers products. Well, it's just hard for me to say. And who else does their own live fermentation? You just do kraut? No, you do kraut, and it's good. Okay, so I'm glad that we talked about this. We talked about it at the beginning. There is a lot of difference between pickles and this type of process because of the fact that most pickles are made with vinegar, and that's the agent that really causes everything to happen.
Yeah, like most condiments have vinegar in them, and traditionally all condiments are basically fermented. Joy makes mustard and ketchup and really anything
But there's no. Where are you? There's no vinegar in your mustard, right? Right, exactly. And it's just totally cultured. And believe me, it's really, really good. And you still owe me 8 ounces, and I'm almost ready for it, just to let you know. All right, so we better get going. Yeah. Show these guys something.
Okay.
All right?
So we'll show you just quickly how to prepare a little bit of sauerkraut. Is that
so what are you going to do?
We have.
Is there another?
Yeah, there's knives. Julie, could you get us a knife if you don't mind, dear? Thank you.
My personal preference is to vary the size that I chop it. For some reason in my mind, I just think that it gives a different amount of surface area for the bacteria to kind of take over. Some people might prefer really, really, really fine for hot dogs and brats and stuff. But then again, if you're eating a burger, sometimes huge fat chunks are pretty awesome too. So I like to vary in the way that I'm chopping it.
I think it's really. I'm glad you brought that up because how do most people eat these kind of products? What do they do with them? I mean, because the only way that I'm familiar with them is really as a condiment, as an accompaniment to something like you said, a burger or fry.
Right. I always recommend it as a condiment, but most people that eat our stuff always tell me that they just eat it right out of the jar without any food at all. They're just like, it's a meal in itself, is from the way it's described. I usually. I eat it with absolutely everything, pretty much.
Great with avocado. That sounds good. And I have to say, the reason these guys are on the show is because I had one spoonful of. I don't remember which one it was actually. Might have been this guy, not positive. And it was like my eyes kind of like really just went. Whoa, and then that gut reaction as it was going down, but my taste buds were so stimulated, and it was a completely different taste sensation than I'd experienced with other types of living foods like this. And so I don't know what magic you guys are creating, but it was the flavor palette was just very wide and wonderful, I guess is the only way I could describe it. It really just was enlivening, and that was cool.
It definitely like sets off your like salivary glands, like any pickle does, but especially this, I think, because it's like we're tied to it, from thousands of years. Like people 2 generations ago made tons of sauerkraut, but we just kind of lost it. That's all the crocks we have are antiques from so long ago.
Okay. So to get to the chopping, one thing you'll notice is that we take off these big leaves because at the end we're going to use these to kind of push down all the content to keep it submerged under the salt water. That way you're sure that all the plant material is going to be in that anaerobic environment with the lactic acid.
So do you want to just define anaerobic and aerobic real quickly again?
Anaerobic is without oxygen. Aerobic is with oxygen.
Okay, so when it's underneath that liquid?
Yeah, when oxygen can get to it, it leaves the potential for a lot of different microorganisms other than the lactic acid producing ones to get in there. But the anaerobic, being anaerobic, the lactic acid producing organisms proliferate and create the acidic environment that keeps all the pathogens and what we would consider bad bacteria from colonizing.
Okay. And so you're going to be cutting this up, and then what's going to happen after that?
After this, we're probably going to cut up some carrots. Right now we're cutting up the cabbage. And then we're going to put it all into a container, mix a brine solution of salt and water. And
particular percentage? Depends on the volume of the product, I imagine.
It does. Dan could tell you more about that.
Okay.
I mean, if we had time, we would just mix the salt with it and let it draw the water out. But if time restricts you, then you can just it has to be good water, though. It can't have chlorine in it because chlorine kills. And which is a good point, because we're killing a lot of our gut bacteria. We don't even know it. And then we're like, oh, we're sick. It's like there's so many reasons why we're sick. It's because of all the crazy food we're eating. You go to the store and there's like pre-made lasagna and all of this. Like, we don't even have time for that.
Why would anybody eat pre-made lasagna? I mean, come on.
You can even have all your veggies soaking in the brine water or soaking in the salt to kind of create the brine. It'll draw the water out for, I've heard of people doing it for a few days at a time.
Okay, so when you say that, you're sprinkling salt, and you guys are going to use, it looks like you're using Himalayan pink salt there, right?
Yeah, or sometimes we use just like, I think it's just some kind of kosher salt, the real salt. And yeah, it'll draw out the moisture, and then.
And so you're covering all of it, covering all the surface, or you're just mixing it up?
Yeah, that's part of the process, is getting it into a big container and mixing it, which actually releases endorphins. It's a pretty awesome experience. You're getting in there. It's like mixing cob or something, like getting just kind of like squishing it together, kind of like breaking up somewhat like bruising it, like you're facilitating the digestive process with your hands.
Oh, interesting. All right, so that's the first thing that's going to happen, and so you're mixing it together with salt, and I can understand exactly what you were saying, that that you've got to really understand that balance, because if you oversalt something, you can't. It's just not edible. I mean, that's just it. It's a real tough one to change once you put too much into it.
So that's why we taste it like as we mix it and let it chill, just to be sure that we're not putting enough or too much salt in it. Then we can add more cabbage or whatever, but you can't take salt out. So you just have to be careful. And we do measure, just generally say we have, 50 pounds of cabbage, and we have so much salt for that, and just to be in those parameters. But since you're getting, it's not like a steady thing, cabbage. It's all different. It's relatively the same, but you're going to have to add different amounts for different. It's just like I was saying earlier. It's like you have to improvise on it a lot of the time, because you can't just like put the right amount in it every time. So
Dan, is that the only mixing bowl we have? Because we're gonna have a lot to do.
Julie will find us another mixing bowl also. Can you turn this burner on for us, if you don't mind, dear? So. Yeah, after some time, maybe 2 years, I'll figure out how to do that. Just we'll see how long it takes. Anyway, so that's an important point that I'm glad to hear that you taste as you go along to see how the volume of salt to vegetable is coming out. And I'm just wondering, I put you guys on the spot, do you think you could come up with at least one little recipe that we could distribute to people eventually, in a couple of weeks, so that they could try this at home with some instructions? That would be kind of fun, wouldn't it?
Perfect measurements?
Pretty good measurements, yeah. I mean, we want somebody like Val to feel real comfortable. We also want Joel to feel like he's not going to be consuming some kind of microorganism that's going to poison his system. I think that'd be fun. So you guys think about it, see if the challenge, if that could work. Or what we can do is we can always rely on Sandor Katz, right?
Yeah, definitely. Sandor Katz is the man.
Okay. So Sandor Katz, if you don't know it, why don't you explain exactly who he is?
Sandor Katz is probably the biggest fermentation revivalist, and he's studied all the different arts of the world as far as fermentation, and he wrote a book his first book was called The Revolution Will Not Be Microwaved, and it's just a talk about the industrialized food system. And then he wrote Wild Fermentation, which was the first book I got a hold of from him. And then now he has a thick, almost like a manual called The Art of Fermentation, where he addresses all of the world's main fermented food traditions. And he has, I think he's HIV positive, so that's a big reason why he's doing it, because it's good for your immune system. But I think he's had it for 20 years, and he's still alive, kicking. So he's very healthy.
He's the fermented man. All right. So once you get this done, I love one of the things about cooking that's so much fun is getting your hands in the food. And so you're talking about, you're actually getting not only your hands, but you're getting your muscles into it to break things down, right?
Yeah, it's a very intimate experience. So you're putting your whole upper body into your digestion in this physical process. In Korea, when it's cabbage harvest time, there's not a single person in Korea who isn't getting their hands into mixing up some cabbage and salt together for kimchi.
That's great. I think it's really is interesting that there is such a revival of this type of food right now. I mean, so many different traditions are going on, but definitely this is one that's big. And I think that it comes from the fact that your food tastes really good. That's for sure, but it's also people feel good when they eat it.
Mm-hmm. When I worked for this company, I worked at a lot of farmers markets where they would miss us, or we would not go to the farmers market. And then when they did see us, they'd be so excited because a lot of them would have C. diff, Crohn's, or ulcerative colitis, which is just Crohn's of the colon. And they said that it pretty much just like helped them get through the day, because it's basically an autoimmune disease like attacking, your digestive tract, which is no good. So when you put these, the commensal microbiome back in there, it kind of puts things back in balance.
What do we have here? This looks like a cultured bioactive hot sauce.
That was, we inoculated, which means add, culture to a bunch of peppers, onions, and garlic, and then we ground them up and squeeze the juice out, and it's alive.
So it's
really?
seasonal special. She's probably our number one fan.
Really? I can't wait. I can't wait. Yeah. But when you say inoculated, so what do you actually use to inoculate your products?
With this one, we use just sauerkraut juice, which is various species of lactobacillus.
Okay. And so depending upon what the product is, you use different types of inoculation?
We usually don't actually add anything. It's already there. And we probably could have did it with the peppers too, but it was just experimental at the time. But you can't just go and buy 20 pounds of peppers, of habaneros or whatever. You'd have to kind of know some people. And John knew this guy at Farmers Market who hooked us up.
Nice. Well, we're going to be able to taste these on. We've got some burgers that I actually made earlier today, and we're going to cook them up here. So we're going to use these as accompaniments to those burgers, and we probably should get some of those on pretty soon. But we'll do that, and then we're also going to have. What's that? We're going to do what with English muffins?
We're going to cook some eggs over easy with these and load it up with some kraut for some people to try.
So you're actually going to cook eggs,
if we have time,
regular eggs, but that's different than this.
Right. And with these pickled eggs, like it's not too common around here. Back home in Florida, every gas station has pickled eggs, what they call chitlins, which is basically like a pig's butthole, pig's feet. They pickle all kinds of stuff.
I love where this show's going today. That's awesome. So let me just give you the recipe for this burger, because I think that it's simple and easy, and probably a lot of people like it because of that. Most vegetarian burgers really don't have a lot of flavor or texture, or there's something missing in most of them. Let's put it this way. This is one that I can't remember where the original source was of this, but Julie, do you mind getting them out so that we could show them? Are they behind me? Oh, cool. So I can show you what they look like. And it's really very, very simple to make. And all it is 3 ingredients. It's wild rice mix. So pecans, exactly. I toasted them, but you don't have to do that. And cheese. And I used Milton Creamery because Milton Creamery is a local provider of cheese here, and if I would suggest to people, if they make this at home, that they find somebody who's making a really good quality cheese around their area and use that. So basically you're just taking the wild rice blend, and you add just a tiny bit more water than you might with regular rice. So if you'd use a cup of wild rice blend, you've got a little tiny bit more water than that, and that's 40 minutes of cooking that wild rice blend. After the water boils, of course, you turn it all the way down. I add a little bit of butter, a little bit of salt to that. And the pecans were toasted, and they were pieces. So you don't want chopped up pecans that are just, you want texture. I think these might be a little too big, but you want to chop them up a little bit so that they're rough chopped, I guess you would say. And the cheese is the binder for this. So the easiest way to do it is to put it in a food processor and put the shredder in and do that. But I didn't even want to bother with that because that meant I had to wash 3 or 4 more things. So I just sliced up the cheese really thin and then cut it up small. And basically what happens is when you take the rice out, you put the rice is really hot, you put the cheese into the bowl, you put the nuts in, and then you mix it all up, and the cheese melts because the rice is so hot, and then you just form the patties with your hands. Now, the key to this is that you can use any kind of seasoning that you like in there to change up the flavors that you end up with. So in this particular batch, what I did was I used a little bit of tamari, and the reason I did that was to add more umami type flavor to this particular batch of burgers. And I also used 2 types of peppers, powdered seasoning of one was an ancho chili, and the other was a smoked habanero. So it adds a little bit of chach to it. It'll have a little bite and also a little smoky flavor, but you can do anything with it, which is really great because you guys have been talking a lot about experimentation, and so it's a perfect way you can, wow, that is beautiful. So that's basically how you do it. And then you freeze them, because what you want to do is you want to freeze them so that they're really hard. When you cook them, you want to put them into a hot pan with some olive oil and get a good sear on them so they don't get messed up by crumbling. apart. And then you can put all kinds of bubbling Brine Brothers fermented products with it. So you guys, thanks so much for doing all this. Let's show everybody what these eggs look like. They look beautiful. Dan Gorman, we want to thank you so much. And John, we want to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
It's been awesome.
Yeah, it's been really great. So
these right here were fermented in the leftover brine of our purple kraut.
Awesome. You've been listening to and watching Great Taste from KRUU 100.1 FM, the solar-powered voice of Fairfield, Iowa, Fairfield Media Center, sponsored by the generous folks at Green Building Supply and Everybody's Whole Foods. So thank you all for enjoying these guys. By the way, one last thing really quick. Nobody can, outside of Fairfield, they can't get your products yet, right?
Not yet, but we plan to go at least in a few Hy-Vees and health food stores.
Okay, and do you have a website?
We do, but it's not complete yet.
So people can keep checking back, and what's that website?
BubblingBrineBrothers.com.
That was easy. BubblingBrineBrothers.com. All right. Steve Boss and everybody from myself and from everybody else here. Right? Thank you guys so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Great taste. Sweet. Sour. So good to taste.